Millionaire strikes pregnant wife 300 times unaware, her powerful CEO father shields her. This was supposed to be the most glamorous night in New York, a charity gala glittering with wealth and elegance. Until a millionaire lost control and turned the ballroom into a horrifying bloody nightmare. He beat his pregnant wife with a leather whip, 300 lashes of pure rage, in front of everyone. But he had no idea the woman he was trying to break was the daughter of a man who would tear his world apart. That night, the Waldorf Astoria wasn't just a hotel. It was a jewel box. Crystal chandeliers dripped diamonds onto the marble floors, casting a soft blue glow over a sea of designer gowns and sharp tuxedos. Laughter mingled with the string quartet, champagne flutes chimed, and cameras flashed endlessly. New York's elite, the powerful, the beautiful. They were all there for the charity gala of the year. No one, not a single soul, could have ever imagined that by dawn, this very ballroom would become a crime scene. Isabella Carter stood quietly at the edge of it all, her hands clasped protectively over her 7-month baby bump. Her sky-blue dress, altered by her own tired hands that morning, was simple, almost invisible amidst the glittering fabrics around her. Her hair was pulled back, her face pale, etched with exhaustion. She tried to smile, but her lips betrayed her, trembling slightly. She knew, deep down, she didn't belong in this dazzling world anymore. Not really. Though there was a time she desperately wished she did. Her husband, Edward Kane, was the absolute center of it all. The ruthless millionaire investor. A man who oozed charm and power. He stood there, a perfect silhouette in his black tuxedo, his voice booming with authority, his smile a cold, chiseled mask of confidence. And wrapped around his arm, bold as brass in a scarlet silk gown, was Vanessa Moore, his mistress. She leaned in, whispered something into his ear, and then let out a laugh that was just a little too loud, just a little too deliberate, for everyone to hear. Guests exchanged discreet glances, pretending they hadn't seen Isabella, the real wife, watching from a distance. Isabella took a slow, shuddering breath. Her hands trembled, her grip tightening on her tiny clutch. She'd begged Edward to let her stay home. Her ankles were swollen, her back ached relentlessly. But he'd scoffed, his voice dripping ice. "You'll come and you'll smile. I won't have you embarrassing me by hiding." So like always she came. Quietly. Obediently. The perfect wife he demanded. Now she just stood there, enduring the whispers, the knowing stares, the sharp sting of humiliation. Vanessa, with a smirk that felt like a slap, turned and raised her glass. Isabella quickly looked away, her vision blurring, the room starting to spin. The air felt heavy, suffocating her. She spotted a passing waiter, desperation making her reach for a tray. She just needed something, anything, to ground herself. The waiter hesitated, then, seeing her distress, offered her a glass of red wine. She only wanted to blend in, to appear normal, to disappear. But her hand shook violently. The glass tilted. And just like that, a few drops of dark Bordeaux spilled, a crimson stain spreading across Edward's pristine white sleeve. And then, time stopped. The music faded to nothing. Conversations choked in mid-sentence. Edward's cold smile froze on his face as he stared down at his ruined sleeve, then at his wife. His eyes, the color of cold hard steel, narrowed into slits of pure fury. "You stupid woman!" he hissed, his voice a venomous whisper that somehow echoed through the sudden silence. Guests stiffened, their breath caught in their throats. Vanessa's painted lips curled into a smirk, a flicker of amusement in her eyes. "I'm so sorry," Isabella whispered, her voice fractured, barely audible. "It was an accident." Before she could even finish, Edward's hand shot out, grabbing her wrist with such force she gasped. "You ruined my suit in front of everyone," he snarled, his grip like iron. "Do you even know what that costs?" She tried to pull away to escape, but his hold only tightened. The room was utterly silent now, an eerie hush. Even the string quartet had fallen quiet. "Edward, please," she begged, her voice barely a breath. "Not here." "Why not?" he snapped, his tone sharp as broken glass. "Maybe this crowd should see the kind of wife I have." Before anyone could even react, he roughly dragged her, pulling her right into the center of the ballroom. Champagne glasses rattled precariously on tables. Every camera in the room swiveled toward them. Then, he yanked a decorative leather whip, a collector's item meant for auction, from a nearby display. The crowd gasped, a collective intake of horror. For a split second, Isabella thought he was bluffing, that he couldn't possibly. But he wasn't. The first lash cracked through the air like a thunderclap, echoing violently against the marble walls. Isabella screamed, a raw, primal sound, stumbling forward as searing pain tore across her back. Then came the second lash, harder. And another. And another. "Stop it!" someone cried out, a lone voice of protest, but no one moved. They were frozen, paralyzed by fear and shock. 50 lashes. Then 100. Each one cutting deeper, burning hotter than the last. Isabella collapsed to her knees, one hand instinctively clutching her swollen belly, the other braced against the cold, unforgiving floor. Tears streamed down her face, blurring the glittering scene around her. "Hold on, baby," she sobbed, whispering to the fragile life inside her. "Please, please hold on." Vanessa, the mistress, just stood there, sipping her champagne, her eyes glinting with a chilling satisfaction. "Pathetic," she murmured to the woman next to her. A cruel, detached observation. The lashes continued, a relentless, sickening rhythm. The whip cracked again and again until the very air in the ballroom seemed to cry out. Blood, dark and stark, began to seep through the thin fabric of Isabella's sky-blue dress. Her breaths turned shallow, ragged. The pain blurred her vision, consumed her, but one thought anchored her, a burning command. Protect the baby. She bent forward, curling around her belly, shielding it, as the blows rained down like fire. Frantic whispers spread through the crowd. "She's pregnant." "He's completely lost his mind." But fear, thick and suffocating, kept them frozen in place. Edward Kane was too powerful, too dangerous. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, after the 300th strike, the whip fell silent. Isabella collapsed completely, her cheek pressing against the cold, slick marble floor, tears and blood mixing on its surface. Edward's chest heaved, his face a mask of triumphant fury. He dropped the whip beside her, a trophy of his rage, and spat out words that silenced the entire room. "That's what happens when you embarrass me." No one dared move. Cameras blinked, mechanical eyes in the dimming light. Then, at the far end of the ballroom, the massive doors swung open. The stunned crowd parted instinctively as a tall man in impeccably tailored black suit entered. His presence was a palpable force, shifting the entire atmosphere of the room. Every last conversation died. It was Robert Carter, CEO of Carter Holdings, the gala's main sponsor, and the father of the woman lying broken on the floor. He'd arrived late, just wrapped up an emergency meeting, completely unaware of the horror that had unfolded. But the moment his gaze fell upon Isabella's blood-soaked dress, her trembling hands instinctively covering her belly, his face transformed. A terrifying, ice-cold fury began to burn behind his eyes. He walked forward slowly, his shoes clicking with a deliberate rhythm against the marble. Edward, caught off guard, turned, his smirk faltering for the first time. "Mr. Carter," he stammered, his voice suddenly shaking. "This isn't what it looks like." Robert cut him off. His voice was low, impossibly calm, but it resonated with an authority that reached every single corner of the vast hall. "You just beat my daughter." The silence that followed was deafening, absolute. Robert knelt beside Isabella, his touch infinitely gentle as he lifted her head. Her lips quivered, her eyes barely open. "Dad," she whispered, weak as a feather. "I'm so sorry." He brushed a strand of hair from her tear-streaked face. "You have nothing to be sorry for, sweetheart." His gaze then rose, cutting through the silence, fixing on Edward Kane. "But he will be." He stood, pulling Isabella carefully into his arms, shielding her from the prying eyes, the flashing cameras that now exploded like lightning around them. The blue chandeliers above reflected off the fresh tears on Isabella's cheeks. For the very first time that night, Edward Kane looked utterly terrified. And in that precise moment, the world began to turn against him. By the way, if you're still with me, still reeling from that unbelievable scene, make sure to hit that subscribe button right now. Because trust me, this story only gets wilder from here. The gala dissolved into absolute chaos. Guests, their faces pale with shock, fled the ballroom, their diamond-studded heels clattering frantically across the marble. Security guards tried desperately to restore some semblance of order, but Robert Carter stood unmoving, his daughter clutched tightly in his arms. The music had stopped, but a haunting echo of the night's violence lingered in the air. Isabella's pale blue dress was now nothing but blood-soaked, tattered rags. Her body trembled against his chest. He could feel her heart, a faint, fragile drum that refused to stop beating. Outside the Grand Hotel, the night was painted in flashing red and white lights from dozens of ambulances. A mob of photographers surrounded the entrance, their voices a cacophony of shouts. "Mr. Carter, is it true Mr. Kane attacked his wife? How is she? Will there be charges?" Robert said nothing. His face a grim mask carved from stone. He gently placed Isabella inside a waiting ambulance, then climbed in, never leaving her side. Inside, a paramedic worked quickly, efficiently. "She's in shock," the woman murmured, checking Isabella's pulse. "But the baby's still moving. We'll know more once we reach the hospital." Robert's hands clenched into impotent fists. He looked down at his daughter, his voice barely a whisper. "Hold on, sweetheart. Just hold on." The ambulance screamed through the midnight streets of Manhattan, sirens wailing, blurring the city lights into streaks of his own crushing guilt. Robert Carter, the man who had built empires, crushed rivals, and moved mountains in the business world, now felt utterly, terrifyingly powerless. He had missed everything. The subtle signs, the bruises she'd tried so hard to hide, the slow, agonizing way her laughter had faded with every phone call. He had failed her. He had failed as a father. At St. Mary's Hospital, doctors whisked Isabella into the emergency ward. Robert waited outside the glass doors, each agonizing second heavier than the last. Finally, a doctor emerged, pulling down his mask, his expression guarded. "She's stable," he said carefully. "The wounds are severe, but she's incredibly strong. The baby's heartbeat is faint but steady. We're monitoring both closely." Robert nodded once, a wave of profound relief washing over him, but his eyes remained hard, unrelenting. "I want the absolute best staff on her, whatever it costs." The doctor hesitated. "Of course, Mr. Carter, but you should know the media is already outside. The story is spreading like wildfire." Robert turned toward the corridor window. Through the glass, he could see the constant flicker of camera flashes outside the hospital gates. "Let them talk," he said, his voice quiet, chillingly calm. "Tonight, the world will see exactly what kind of monster he really is." Hours later, as dawn just began to paint the sky, Isabella woke. Her eyes fluttered open to the soft rhythmic beeping of monitors and the sterile, unforgiving smell of antiseptic. For a dizzying moment, she wondered if it had all been a terrible dream. Then she saw him, her father, slumped in a chair beside her bed. His usually immaculate gray hair was messy, his tie undone, his eyes rimmed red with exhaustion and worry. "Dad," she whispered, her voice fragile. Robert leaned forward immediately, taking her hand in his. "I'm here," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You're safe now." She looked around the stark room, confusion battling with a fresh wave of fear. "The baby." "The baby's still fighting," he reassured her gently. "Just like you." Tears, hot and uncontrollable, welled in her eyes. I thought I was going to lose everything." Robert's voice trembled slightly. "You will not lose anything again. Not while I'm breathing." She turned her face away, shame burning her cheeks. "I didn't tell you how bad it was. I thought I could fix it. I thought if I stayed quiet, he'd change." Robert shook his head slowly, his jaw tight. "That man was never going to change, Isabella. Men like him only understand power. And now he's about to learn he attacked the wrong family." She blinked, startled by the sheer steel in his tone. "What are you going to do?" "What I should have done a long time ago," he said, rising slowly to his feet, his gaze fixed on some distant point. "I'm going to destroy him." That morning, the news exploded. Edward Kane's name, once synonymous with ruthless success, was now splashed across every network, every headline. Millionaire investor Edward Kane attacks pregnant wife at charity gala. Carter family demands justice. Video clips, secretly recorded by shocked guests, flooded social media. You saw Isabella collapsing, Edward towering over her, the whip a sickening blur. The world watched in horror. In the gleaming boardroom of Carter Holdings, Robert faced his son, David, and their longtime legal advisor, Sarah Chen. The city skyline, usually a symbol of ambition, seemed to mock them with its calm. David slammed his fist on the polished table. "We can't just sit here, Dad. He nearly killed her. Sarah, ever the pragmatist, adjusted her glasses. Emotional decisions lead to mistakes. We need strategy. We'll start by gathering every piece of evidence, build an ironclad criminal and civil case, and make sure the press gets the unvarnished truth. Robert's eyes burned with a quiet, terrifying fury. Make it happen. Every connection he has, every reporter he's ever charmed, every shareholder. I want them to see him for what he truly is. David nodded grimly. I'll contact Aaron. He can trace Kane Group's shell companies, dig into any financial crimes. We'll hit him from both sides, legal and economic. Sarah looked at Robert, her expression serious. You understand what you're starting, don't you? This will be public. Brutal. There's no going back. Robert's jaw tightened. He made it public the moment he laid a hand on my daughter. Meanwhile, at the hospital, Isabella lay awake, watching the sunrise paint the sky a pale, gentle blue, the same color as her torn dress. Nurses whispered as they passed her door. She could feel the world watching her, judging, pitying her. She hated it. But then she saw her father standing by the doorway, phone pressed to his ear, his face etched with grim determination. And she felt something she hadn't felt in years. Hope. Later that day, Robert returned to her room, his demeanor softer now. I spoke to the doctors, he said, sitting beside her. You'll need rest, but you'll recover. The baby's condition is improving too. She nodded weakly. What about Edward? He's in hiding, Robert replied. His lawyers are scrambling, but don't worry. The moment he steps out, the world will be waiting for him. She closed her eyes, whispering, I don't want revenge, Dad. I just want peace. Robert reached over, gently brushing her hair back from her forehead. Peace will come, sweetheart, but only when justice is done. Outside, cameras flashed relentlessly through the hospital windows. Reporters shouted her name. Isabella, do you forgive him? Will you testify? She turned away from the noise, holding her father's hand tighter. Do whatever you have to, Dad. Just make sure he can never hurt anyone again. Robert nodded slowly. That's exactly what I intend to do. He stood, walking to the door, pausing for one last look at his daughter, resting in the soft, pale light. In that moment, he stopped being just a businessman. He became something far more dangerous. A father at war. The wind howled outside the Carter Holdings tower, rattling the tall glass windows as the storm of justice began to build. Inside the boardroom, the air was thick with intense focus. Robert Carter sat at the head of the table, his eyes sharp as steel. Across from him, Sarah Chen had stacks of legal folders spread before her like weapons. David Carter stood beside her, arms crossed, his jaw tense. The media pressure is working, he said, but Kane still has money. He's hiding behind a team of lawyers. Robert nodded. That's why we'll take away the one thing he thinks can protect him, his empire. Sarah opened a folder, pulling out a document stamped with the Kane Group logo. We found something. Edward forged Isabella's signature on multiple financial statements. He transferred assets from their joint accounts into offshore holdings under fake names. There's even a deed, supposedly signed by her, for a property in the Hamptons. She never authorized it. David's eyes widened. So, he used her signature to steal her own wealth? Exactly, Sarah replied. And that, Mr. Carter, is fraud. If we file this correctly, he'll face both criminal and financial ruin. Robert leaned forward, his voice low and dangerous. Make sure every piece of evidence is verified. I don't want him slipping through on a technicality. Aaron Lee entered, his tablet glowing with spreadsheets. I traced the offshore accounts, he said, his quiet voice holding immense power. He funneled money through 5 shell corporations. Some of them are registered under Vanessa Moore's name. At the mention of Vanessa, the room grew even colder. Robert spoke first. Get her in here. 2 days later, in a quiet private office, Vanessa Moore sat across from Sarah Chan and a small camera crew. She looked nothing like the glamorous woman from the gala. Her hair was pulled back, her eyes swollen from sleepless nights. The red dress was gone, replaced by a plain gray suit. Sarah adjusted her recorder. Miss Moore, do you understand that this statement will be used in court? Vanessa nodded slowly. Yes. Tell us about the accounts, Sarah prompted. Vanessa hesitated, then sighed. He told me to open them. Said it was for business convenience. I didn't question it. He'd get drunk and brag about how he could make anyone's name appear on paper. He used her signature often. He'd laugh about it. Did you ever see him forge it yourself? Sarah asked. Vanessa's eyes filled with tears. Yes, once. He practiced until it looked perfect. David, standing in the corner, clenched his fists. Sarah continued calmly. Did he ever mention hurting Isabella physically before the gala? Vanessa nodded again, a shudder running through her. He said she was weak, that he had to keep her in line. I tried to ignore it, but after that night, I can't anymore. I saw her fall. I saw the blood and I did nothing. I can't undo it, but I can tell the truth. Sarah closed her folder. That's all I need. Thank you. When Vanessa left, David turned to Sarah. Do you think she's being honest? Sarah replied. Yes. And even if she isn't, the documents don't lie. Later that evening, Robert joined Sarah in his office overlooking the city. The storm outside had turned to rain, tapping rhythmically on the windows. We file tomorrow, he said quietly. And we release it to the press right after. Sarah looked at him. You know what this means, Robert? The Kane Group will collapse overnight. Thousands of employees will be affected. Robert's voice was steady. Then they'll learn what it means to build on corruption. Edward made his choice. Now he'll face it. Meanwhile, in her hospital room, Isabella was reading the latest headlines on her phone. The articles were relentless. Every channel spoke her name. The beaten wife who fights back. The Carter family declares war. She felt exposed, yet strangely powerful. Her story was no longer hidden. Robert visited later that night. He sat beside her bed and took her hand. We found proof, he said. She looked up, confused. Proof of what? That he stole from you. He forged your name to move millions into secret accounts. Her lips parted in shock. He used my signature. Yes, Robert confirmed. But now it's over. Sarah is filing the case tomorrow. She fell silent, staring at her hands. I don't care about the money. I just want him to stop breathing down my life. Robert's expression softened. He already lost that power. Every time you speak, he loses more. Isabella nodded faintly. Then let's finish it. The next morning, the Carter legal team filed the lawsuit in the Supreme Court of New York. It was a massive document, filled with pages of bank records, forged contracts, and Vanessa Moore's testimony. Within hours, news agencies broke the story. Edward Kane accused of forging wife's signature and hiding millions. Carter Holdings provides evidence of financial fraud. Television screens across the city showed Robert Carter standing at a podium. This is not about wealth. Headline: The Trial of Edward Kane, Verdict Day. Inside the courtroom was silent, except for the clicking of cameras. The air felt heavy, as if everyone was holding a collective breath. Isabella sat beside her father, hands resting over her belly. She could feel the faint movements of her unborn child. Robert Carter sat next to her, calm but unreadable. His face was a mask carved from resolve. Judge Harrison Vaughn entered and took his seat. The gavel struck once. All rise. The crowd stood. When the judge began to read, the entire room froze. After reviewing all evidence presented, including video footage, witness testimony, and forensic analysis, this court finds the defendant, Edward Kane, guilty on all counts. Gasps filled the courtroom. The judge continued. Mr. Kane is hereby convicted of aggravated assault, forgery, financial fraud, and the willful endangerment of a pregnant woman. He will serve a minimum sentence of 15 years in state prison, with additional penalties pending further investigation. The sound of the gavel echoed like thunder. The courtroom erupted. Some clapped, others cried. Reporters scrambled toward the exits to broadcast the news first. Isabella sat still for a moment, tears streaming silently down her cheeks. She looked at Robert, who placed a firm, comforting hand over hers. It's over, he whispered. He can't touch you anymore. Across the room, Edward sat motionless. His lawyers whispered frantically, but he no longer listened. His empire, his pride, his control. Everything had evaporated in seconds. For the first time in his life, he looked small. As security led him away in handcuffs, he turned his head and met Isabella's eyes. She didn't look away. Her expression was calm, not vengeful. That was what broke him most. Outside, the city roared with reaction. Television crews reported live as headlines flashed across every screen. Edward Kane sentenced. Carter family triumphs in court. Back inside the courthouse, Sarah Chen shook Robert's hand. "You did what few men with power ever do," she said quietly. "You used it for good." Robert's reply was simple. "It's what power is meant for." Later that evening, the Carter family returned to their private residence. The media still swarmed outside, but security kept them at bay. Inside the quiet mansion, Robert stood by the window, watching the lights of the city flicker like stars below. David entered, carrying a folder. "The markets have reacted," David said. "Kane Group shares are down 80%. Investors are fleeing. The board announced his removal effective immediately." Robert nodded slowly. "And the assets?" David replied. "Frozen. Every major bank has cut ties." "He's done." There was no satisfaction in Robert's face. Only calm. "Good. Make sure every employee gets paid. No one else should suffer for his sins." David looked surprised. "You're serious?" Robert turned toward him. "Yes. We destroy his power, not his people. That's the difference between us and him." David smiled faintly. "Mom would have said the same thing." Robert's expression softened. "Your mother always believed in mercy after justice. I'm still learning." Across the city, Edward sat alone in a holding cell. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. The sound of the door closing behind him was sharp and final. He looked down at his hands, no longer adorned with the expensive watch he once wore like a crown. The silence was suffocating. For the first time, he had nothing left to manipulate, no one left to control. Meanwhile, Isabella was still at the hospital for observation. The stress of the trial had strained her body, and the doctors wanted her under care. The room was quiet except for the steady heartbeat of her unborn child on the monitor. She looked at the ceiling, tears welling again. But these were not tears of pain. They were of relief. Robert entered quietly. He pulled a chair to her bedside. "You did it," he said softly. "We did it," she corrected. "You stood up for me when I couldn't." He smiled faintly. "That's what fathers do." She took his hand. "I used to think power was what destroyed people. Now I see it's the lack of love that does." Robert squeezed her fingers gently. "Love is the only power that lasts." Across town, the Carter Holdings headquarters held a press conference. Reporters filled the room. Cameras clicked as Robert stepped to the podium, wearing his dark suit and calm expression. The lights reflected faintly on the silver streaks in his hair. He began, his voice low and commanding. "Today is not a day of victory. It is a day of accountability. The law has spoken. But we must remember that justice is not vengeance. It is a lesson. When a man believes his wealth places him above the law, that is when society must remind him that no one is untouchable." He paused. The crowd hung on every word. This case has inspired many to speak out. If even one woman finds the courage to leave an abusive home because of what my daughter endured, then her pain will not be in vain. The Carter family stands with every survivor. The room erupted in applause. The cameras flashed, capturing the image of a father who had turned grief into purpose. Later that night, the story dominated every major network. Anchors spoke of Robert Carter as the Iron Father. Social media overflowed with messages of support. At home, Isabella watched the broadcast from her hospital bed. The blue glow of the screen bathed her face in soft light. Her father's words filled the room. She placed her hand over her belly and whispered, "He did it." The baby kicked lightly in response, as if answering her. For the first time in months, she felt something she had not felt since before the nightmare began. Safety. Outside, the rain had stopped. The city lights shimmered against puddles on the streets. It was quiet, almost peaceful. In the Carter mansion, Robert walked through the halls, the weight of months of battle finally lifting from his shoulders. He entered his study where an old photograph of Isabella as a child sat on his desk. He picked it up and smiled. "You're safe now, sweetheart," he murmured. "You're finally safe." He looked out the window one last time before turning off the light. The skyline glowed faintly in pale blue hues, reflecting the color of hope that now belonged to them both. 1 year had passed since the verdict that shook New York. The memory of Edward Kane's downfall still lingered in every headline, every whisper of corporate gossip. His empire was gone. His name erased from the towers that once bore it. But tonight, at the Waldorf Astoria, the same ballroom that had witnessed Isabella Carter's humiliation would now witness her triumph. The grand chandeliers glittered above a sea of guests. Music floated softly through the air. Journalists and dignitaries filled the hall, waiting for the annual Carter Foundation Gala. This year's theme was simple and powerful: hope restored. Isabella stood behind the curtain of the stage, breathing slowly. Her light blue gown shimmered under the soft lighting. The fabric flowed like water around her. It was not just a dress. It was a statement. The color that once symbolized her pain now represented rebirth. Robert stood beside her, looking proud and calm. "Are you ready?" he asked gently. She smiled faintly. "I've been ready for a long time." The announcer's voice echoed through the speakers. "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Mrs. Isabella Carter, founder of the Hope Foundation." Applause thundered across the hall as Isabella stepped into the light. Cameras flashed from every direction. She walked gracefully to the podium, her heart pounding, but her step steady. When she reached the microphone, she paused, letting the applause fade. "1 year ago," she began, her voice clear, "this ballroom was a place of pain. Tonight, it is a place of purpose." The audience fell silent. "I stand before you not as a victim, but as proof that survival is possible. My story was made public without my consent, but I have chosen to reclaim it. The Hope Foundation exists for women who think they have no way out. It exists so that no one ever has to live through what I did." Tears glistened in the eyes of many listeners. Robert stood at the side of the stage, watching her with quiet pride. Isabella continued, "Forgiveness is not weakness. It is freedom. My father taught me that true power is not measured by how much we control others, but by how much we protect them." The audience rose in a standing ovation. The sound echoed through the grand hall like redemption itself. Outside, beyond the golden doors, a man stood in the rain. His suit was wrinkled, his hair unkempt. It was Edward Kane. He had come out of curiosity, or perhaps out of desperation, to see what he had lost. The guards at the entrance stopped him immediately. "Invitation, sir?" one of them asked firmly. Edward's voice was low, tired. "I just want to look, that's all." The guard shook his head. "This event is private." Edward took a step closer, glancing through the glass doors. From where he stood, he could see Isabella on stage. She looked radiant, untouchable. Her father stood beside her, his hand resting on her shoulder. They were everything he had tried to destroy, and they had survived him. He swallowed hard, his reflection merging with the glass. The faint music from inside drifted out as the doors opened briefly to allow another guest in. The guard closed them again, and Edward was left outside. Inside, the gala continued with elegance. Robert took the stage next, his presence commanding instant silence. "Tonight," he said, "we celebrate the courage of women who have turned pain into power, but we also remember that justice is not the end of a story. It is the beginning of rebuilding." He turned toward Isabella. "My daughter taught me that resilience can be inherited. She reminded me that even in the darkest nights, there is a light worth protecting." The crowd erupted once more in applause. The soft blue lights bathed the ballroom, creating an almost dreamlike glow. Back outside, Edward lingered near the fountain, drenched by rain. The sound of water splashing mixed with the muffled applause coming from inside. He sank onto a marble bench, head in his hands. No cameras followed him now, no admirers gathered. The empire he had built was dust, and the woman he had once controlled was now the face of strength. A reporter recognized him from a distance and whispered to her cameraman. "That's him," she said quietly. "Edward Kane. Look at him now." But she did not film. Even the media had lost interest in his misery. Inside the ballroom, the music shifted to a gentle piano melody. Isabella held her father's arm as they descended from the stage. People approached to congratulate them. Politicians, philanthropists, and survivors who had found hope through the foundation. One young woman stepped forward, tears streaming down her cheeks. "You saved me," she said softly. "I left because of your story." Isabella embraced her without hesitation. "No, sweetheart. You saved yourself. I just reminded you that you could." Robert watched the exchange with quiet pride. For him, this night was not about revenge. It was about closure. The cycle of pain had ended here, in the same place it had begun. Later in the evening, Isabella walked alone to the balcony overlooking the city. The rain had stopped and the skyline glowed under the soft blue lights of the gala. She closed her eyes and breathed in deeply. The air smelled clean. New. Robert joined her, his footsteps quiet. "You did it," he said gently. She turned to him. "No, Dad. We did it." He smiled. "Maybe, but tonight the world saw you not as the woman who was hurt, but as the woman who rose." She looked over the city, her hand resting on the balcony rail. "I think Mom would have liked this view." "She would have loved it," he replied softly. Below them, photographers took one last wide shot of the gala, capturing the glowing blue light through the windows. To the public, it looked like a fairy tale ending, but to Isabella, it was more than that. It was proof that light could bloom even from brokenness. Inside the hall, guests raised their glasses in a final toast. The orchestra played the last note of the night. The applause rolled like gentle thunder. Outside, Edward Kane rose from the bench and looked up at the bright windows above. The reflection of blue light shimmered across his face. Then he turned and walked into the darkness, disappearing without a sound. Back inside, Isabella looked toward the same glass doors where her nightmare had once begun. She smiled faintly. The ghosts of that night were gone. Only hope remained. The first light of morning spilled over Los Angeles like a promise. The city was quiet, the kind of quiet that comes only after a storm. On a glass building downtown, a new silver sign gleamed under the rising sun. It read, "The Hope Foundation." Inside the building, the lobby buzzed with energy. Fresh flowers lined the marble entrance, their pale blue petals arranged in neat rows. Reporters waited near the glass doors, their cameras ready. But this time, the attention was gentle. It was admiration, not intrusion. Isabella Carter stood near the podium at the front of the hall, her daughter in her arms. The baby, only a few months old, had soft curls and curious eyes that reflected the light. She named her Hope, the word that had carried her through every night of pain. She looked around the lobby, filled with guests, survivors, and friends. It was the official opening of the foundation she had built from the ashes of her tragedy. Every corner of the building symbolized a step toward healing. The walls were painted in soft sky blue tones, and engraved on the entrance plaque were the words, "Out of pain, we rise." Robert Carter stood nearby, dressed in a black suit and light blue tie, his silver hair glowing in the morning light. He smiled as he watched his daughter speak to guests, his expression filled with pride. Beside him was David Carter, who had managed the financial structure of the foundation. Together, they had turned vengeance into vision. When it was time, the announcer called Isabella to the podium. Applause filled the hall as she stepped forward, holding her daughter close. She paused to steady her voice. "A year ago," she began, "I stood in a courtroom, waiting for justice. Today I stand in a place built from that. Justice." The room went silent. This foundation exists for women who think they are alone. For mothers who believe they have nowhere to go. I was one of them once. I believed silence would protect me. But silence only hides the pain. Speaking saved my life and it gave me the strength to help others find theirs. She glanced at Robert, who nodded proudly. My father showed me what real power means. It isn't about money or control. It's about standing up when no one else will. He taught me that strength begins the moment fear ends. The crowd erupted in applause. Tears glistened on faces throughout the room. Isabella smiled, kissed her daughter's forehead and whispered softly, "This is for you." Later, after the ceremony, she walked outside to the steps of the building. The morning air was cool, carrying the scent of flowers from the garden below. A journalist approached gently. "Mrs. Carter," she asked, "how does it feel to have turned such a dark chapter into something so beautiful?" Isabella thought for a moment. "It feels like breathing again," she said. "Pain changes you, but it doesn't have to define you." You can build something from it. You just have to decide that it ends with you. The journalist smiled, thanked her, and walked away. Robert joined her on the steps, his hands in his pockets. You handled that well, he said with a proud grin. She laughed softly. I had a good teacher. They stood in silence for a moment, watching the city wake up. The morning sun painted everything in shades of gold and pale blue. It was the same color that had followed her since that terrible night, now transformed into something pure. I've been thinking, Robert said quietly. It's time we go back to the house. She turned to him, surprised. The mansion? He nodded. You don't have to, but I think there's something there waiting to be finished. That afternoon, they drove together to the old Carter estate in Beverly Hills. The gates opened slowly, creaking as if awakening from a long sleep. The house was just as she remembered, elegant, but haunted by memories. Inside, the grand staircase still gleamed under the sunlight, filtering through tall windows. It was the same staircase where she had once fallen, clutching her belly, where the world had gone black before everything changed. Robert placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. You don't owe this place anything, he said softly. Isabella walked slowly to the fifth step, the one where her blood had once stained the marble. She knelt down and placed a small bouquet of light blue flowers on the stair. Her hand lingered there for a moment. This isn't for him, she said quietly. It's for me. Robert stood behind her, watching silently. She looked up at the sunlight streaming through the glass windows. I forgive him, she said. Not because he deserves it, but because I deserve peace. Robert's eyes softened. That's how healing begins. She rose to her feet, holding her daughter close. The baby stirred, tiny fingers gripping her dress. Isabella smiled through tears. She'll never know the darkness I did, she said. No, Robert agreed. She'll know light because you turned it on. They stood there for a while, the sound of the wind rustling through the curtains. Outside, the city hummed with life. Somewhere far away, a church bell rang, marking the hour. As they walked out of the mansion, Isabella took one last look at the staircase. It no longer looked like a place of pain. It looked like a place of rebirth. Back at the foundation later that evening, the building glowed with warm light. Survivors gathered in the main hall, sharing stories, holding hands, and finding strength in one another. Isabella walked among them quietly, smiling as she passed. Every voice in that room was part of something she had built from the ground up. At the end of the night, Robert stood near the exit, watching her. David joined him, folding his arms with pride. She did it, he said softly. Robert nodded. She became the woman her mother always believed she'd be. Outside, the city lights flickered under the clear night sky. Isabella stepped out, holding baby Hope in her arms. The wind lifted her hair as she looked up at the stars. She whispered, "We're free now." The baby cooed softly, her small hand reaching toward the light. Isabella smiled and kissed her forehead. As she walked toward the car, the glass doors of the foundation reflected her image. No longer the woman who had been broken, but the woman who had rebuilt herself piece by piece. Behind her on the wall above the entrance, the foundation's motto shimmered in silver, "Out of pain, we rise." And in that final moment, as dawn touched the horizon once more, Isabella Carter knew she had done more than survive. She had created a legacy that would never fade. This isn't just Isabella's story anymore. It's a testament to the power of resilience and the incredible strength within us all. But what about you? If you've ever faced a moment that tried to break you, or if you know someone who has, what did it take to find your own hope restored? Share your thoughts and your courage in the comments below. I read every single one, and I truly want to hear from you.